A couple of years ago, the Canadian government decided that cannabis was going to be legalized, and for the longest time there was a run-up and people were very nervous about what was going to happen. On October 17th, when the legislation finally was put into action, well, the world didn't end. However, politically, it was a very difficult time and continues to be so for Kahnawake, not only for the people of Kahnawake, but for the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake. We'll talk about the legislation that Kahnawake is planning to put forth. It is in the final stages, and joining us today on the program, Portfolio Chief Rhonda Kirby, also the Commissioner of Public Safety, Ron Skye, who is also on the Cannabis Working Group, and Chief Lloyd Phillips, who has community safety as one of his portfolios, and is not working on the file itself, but we thought it would be interesting to get his perspective because he spoke on this matter on the Party Line Talk Show last week, and I think he had some interesting things to say. First of all, welcome everybody, and good day. We'll start with you, Rhonda. It's been a challenge putting together a draft law with regulations, and you know, a lot of work has gone in. There's been a lot of consultation, and as we get to the end, people are still saying, "I didn't know about this." That's been a real concern. We'll get to that portion in a bit, but why did Kahnawake decide that it was a good idea for this community to have its own legislation?
Well, when we heard about the impending legislation that was going to be coming in force, we started talking about it at our table, and we felt it would be beneficial to the community to take a more proactive approach. So we have been doing a lot of work in the past 2 years before we actually got to the draft law point. So, and we've talked about it, about how many communities we've been to. We've been to several facilities of different sizes to see exactly what goes on. And we did feel it was really important to have a draft law, a law put in place for the community.
When we talk about the law, there's a Canadian law that exists. What's the difference between our law and the Canadian law?
Well, we do have very many similarities. We are promoting the Health Canada process, and we're hoping that any individuals that are looking to have a permit do look at the Health Canada application. It is it's a requirement, and it's quite an extensive application that you have to go through. Mm-hmm.
I guess in the consultation it came out fairly early, and anybody can answer this one, but people in Kahnawake were not comfortable with having a situation like Tyendinaga, for example, where it seemed like a cannabis shop was opened on every corner, and that came out early on in the process. So what exactly has been done to kind of curb that, or was that the intent of the law?
Well, initially, you know, that was one of our visits that Gina and I had done, and at that time there was quite a number of dispensaries that were opened, unlicensed dispensaries. We did have an opportunity to speak to their chief of police, who had concerns about what was going on in the community, and at that time their band council was not really looking at any type of legislation for the community. So we took that approach to say that we need to do something for our own community, and that was the whole reason for the moratorium to be put in place.
Mm-hmm. So a lot of work has gone on, and from a safety point of view, we talk about this law being about health and safety. Ron, you're with the Public Safety Commission. I know there have been meetings going on with the various entities, and what can you tell us?
Well, I mean, the legislation, I think, is needed. I mean, it's not simply just to put legislation in place, but there's different aspects that we look at as far as jurisdiction is concerned within our own community, how we regulate that type of product within the territory. We know from experience in relation to tobacco and even alcohol to a certain degree, that there needs to be a regulatory component. We currently have, as you know, there's a moratorium in place in relation to any dispensaries or manufacturing going on. And from a public safety perspective, I mean, we have to look at our youth, obviously, you know, and the public in general. And I think it's important that we have this piece of legislation put in place where we can have the say in how it's going to be regulated. We know it's out there. We can't live in a bubble and put walls up around our territory. We're a very mobile people. And we do bring in some vices at times. And unfortunately, this may be considered a vice across Canada, even though it's legalized now. But I think we have to look at it also from the perspective of trying to eradicate to a certain degree the organized crime influence. We know it's there. And it's not to say that this piece of legislation is going to turn that over in 1 week or a day or a year. I think an educational component is going to be a major part of how we're going to move forward with this. From the Justice Commission, from the Public Safety Commission, we've discussed it, and part of our responsibility is to try and educate the community in relation to this. I think that Derek Mentor, the director from KSCS, is on the right track, really trying to promote the educational aspect of it. And I think the other entities or institutions that would be involved in this would be wise to also, take that sentiment forward. We'll never eliminate, I don't think, be it alcohol or any type of drugs. But we do have to advocate on the responsible use, if you would, of that type of substance.
It's very interesting that, speaking of responsible use and worrying about younger people, in the draft law, there was a lot of back and forth, even on the working group, and it came out that there was support for. And this came from Derek. You mentioned Derek. Derek was very influential. He at a couple of the community information sessions, for example, when he spoke, people just sat back and went, wow. But the Kahnawake law, the Kahnawake Cannabis Control Act, has something that nobody else had at one point, was advocating for or pushing a different minimum age of 21. Because of the worry of the developing brain and things like that. And lo and behold, Quebec government came, once it was elected, said basically the same thing. So there's been some interesting things going on. In the 2 years, Rhonda, what's been the biggest challenge for you? Because you look at the health and safety, but there's also another aspect to this. People saying, well, there might be an opportunity here. Has that been, in terms of economic development? So has that been a problem in terms of getting this legislation to a point where it will be passed and implemented?
Well, there certainly are opportunities for individuals in the community, but I think the most important point is to get the law passed. And we've tried to explain that, there were two components to this. We did have a research group and the legislative part. So they are both running at the same time. Because of the moratorium statements that we did put out, we have been contacted by quite a few businesses across the country. So there are opportunities out there for community members.
Yeah, but has that made it more difficult to move this legislation into the...
Well, I think so. I think at the last hearing that we had, there was a group of people there who felt that we were ramming it down their throat, that they hadn't heard about anything. And we've said it, many, many times. We've talked about it at every community meeting. We've had information sessions, business sessions, and... we've been on the radio, we've been in the newspaper. So it's hard to believe that people have never heard about this before.
Is it possible that people who just aren't comfortable with it, kind of like, when it's one of those things where they go, la, 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 I don't want to hear it, I don't want to hear it, so you don't pay attention to what's going on. I think I've seen that in some other instances in the past. And so how do you get through to that type of person?
Well, that was the whole reason that we had the polling station. We had it on for 6 days, and people had an opportunity. We did a lot of advertising and posters in the community, and to let people know that they had an opportunity to come there and voice their opinions. So, and give their comments. So we have posted all the results, and people were in favor of having a business opportunity in the community. So That will only come after we pass the law.
And one of those things that when the poll happened, the reason for the poll was because the technical survey, which was done a couple of years ago and was, I think, fairly successful. It really said where the community was. That was one of the questions, though, that was kind of iffy. And now we have a little more clarity in that, so that helps. Were you surprised by the result?
No, I'm glad that we, gave the community the opportunity to do that because of, mentioning that last meeting that we had and that people still didn't know anything. It was their chance. So I was quite pleased at the turnout. So we're going back to council again. We do have a number of meetings that still have to come. There are still a couple of meetings that we have planned in the next few weeks before the law is actually passed.
Well, of course, one of those will be the first hearing. There was one meeting, and you made reference to that when really the law itself wasn't discussed. And at this point, there's no choice in the matter but to actually just go in there and talk about the law, not about whether it's a type 1 or a type 2 process or anything like that.
And that was something we had talked about at that meeting too. And we know since then that there are concerns about the categorization, but we've said it over and over. We're not changing the categorization at this point, and that's specifically what the meeting will be about on November 20th. It's if anyone has concerns about the actual content of the law at this point.
Mm-hmm. Ron, you took part in one of the biggest laws in Kahnawake, the Kahnawake Justice Act, and the roll up to that. A real challenge to get people to understand what the laws are supposed to be and why they are there. Jurisdiction, why is it so important for us?
Well, I mean, I think it's something that we've always tried to attain, from this community to assert more jurisdiction in the areas of governance, being executive, legislative, and judicial. It's all part of it. The rollout within the Justice Act, if you would, we worked on that for almost 10 years, to finally get to passing it. There's still obviously some work that needs to be done in relation to that, but you can see the challenges, in trying to inform the community, get their input, educate them into what it actually means, and, it is a painstaking process at times, but it's we're going through an evolution right now in our community as far as developing our own law, and it's something I guess we have to struggle through at this point. Just to make come back to the cannabis law itself, we have to understand that before there's any talk of how that would all roll out in relation to an economic potential or availability, we need to pass the law first. Once that's done, then you can look at what opportunities will be there. But in the absence of the law, without that framework, we can't go anywhere. So it's very critical that we pass the law first. Then we look at what the economic opportunities may be in relation to in the law. And the regulatory component would be made by the Cannabis Control Commission. So there's a regulatory component there that still has to be looked at, and there'll still be some consultation with the community in relation to that.
All right. Well, Lloyd Phillips is on the program with us today, and Lloyd comes from I think an interesting perspective because former council chief, then a technician, then back on council, and so you saw some of this happening from different points of view. Mm-hmm. In this case, with the Canadian legislation being, the announcement, it's happening. I guess that kind of put us at a bit of a disadvantage in terms of having to create, because as Ron said, it took 10 years to create the Justice Act. It had a lot of support, but a lot of work had to, be done ahead of time. And in this case, it kind of seems rushed for some people, and I guess it is. Mm-hmm. Canada, kind of put everybody under the gun here. But you had some interesting things to say recently when you were on K103's Party Line talk show, and you talked about because you're not on this file. You're a council chief. You have your portfolios, but you had a perspective that I thought was important to hear in terms of the reason, the jurisdiction, the importance of that. So whether you're a supporter of cannabis, whether you've never used it in your life, whether you just are uncomfortable, there's still a point to be made that if you don't, like, everybody needs to care, basically.
Yeah, and exactly, because this is something that definitely impacts the entire community in one way or another. I believe it is a Type 2 legislation, even though it does have large impacts on the community. Because if somebody is not a user, or somebody is not doesn't want to get involved in the industry, then it doesn't impact them directly. So it's definitely belongs as a Type 2. I'll start off by mentioning that. No, but whether or not you're supportive of the legalization of cannabis, use of cannabis, sale of cannabis, manufacturing of cannabis, whether or not where you stand on those issues, we do need a Kahnawake law. We always say we want to occupy the field, because if we create a vacuum and then other outside authorities' laws will apply. For example, Canadian and or Quebec laws will apply. So let's create a law that will occupy the field, and then that law will set the parameters on how or if cannabis will be sold and how it can be manufactured and so on within the territory. And that also makes it much clearer in terms of law enforcement aspect. The peacekeepers need to be clear what laws apply, which laws do not apply. Where they go and to enforce certain elements of law. So it clarifies it in many areas. And again, it's something that is certainly needed, because as we've seen, there has been people who tried to open up shops and sell, and the peacekeepers will have no choice but to shut them down, because they are unregulated, they are unlicensed under any jurisdiction, and at this point in time, with a vacuum, they have no choice but to use outside laws to do what they need to do in terms of ensuring community safety. So with our own law, it's our own jurisdiction, it's our own authority. I think that's a positive step in the sense of occupying the field. Again, like I said, no matter where people stand on the issue, we need to have our own law, similar to any other law, i.e. membership, for example. No matter where you stand on the term of membership, we need to have our own law, and I think everybody could agree to that we need our own law. So in this case, it's very similar, and I think we're on the right track, and we need to get something done sooner rather than later, because as time progresses, we need to ensure enforceability. We need to ensure the safety of our community. And I think it's also safe to say that the vast majority of our community does not want to see cannabis shops open up all over the community. And we have to take the steps to ensure that doesn't happen.
The law, it took 2 years to draft and put it out there, and community members had opportunity to have input. Did they take that opportunity?
Yes, they did, and there was quite a few who did participate in that, and their comments were incorporated. So the current draft that we have out now has taken all of that into consideration.
Mm-hmm. And the meeting in late September, the first hearing, where the law was actually presented, and no one really wanted to talk about the law at that point, and there were different, it should be a Type 1. We shouldn't do this. We shouldn't do that. I should be able to do it any way I want. Things like that. Since that time, have any of the people who were participating or speaking at that meeting, have they come forth and said, I looked at the law and I suggest that maybe we do this, or I suggest you take that out, or anything like that?
Not at all. Not at all. They still had an opportunity, and I think the ones who were very vocal at that meeting that night had their concerns. I think at times it was more self-serving, but we haven't heard from them either. And again, that was the whole reason for having the polling station. And I don't even know what to say anymore. Like, how many times can you give them that chance to come forward with their concerns? I think we've done as much as we possibly could have done in the past 2 years, and we're at the final stage now.
All right, well, I don't want to belabor this. We, on November 20th, which is a Tuesday, the hope is that we have the meeting and just ask questions. What about the law itself? Did we get this right? And then have that discussion, and hopefully at that point it gets approved, because we've gone through all of the steps. Are you comfortable that all of the steps were taken? Was there enough consultation? As a portfolio chief who's been, through this, because this has been a difficult file. It's not your typical one where, like when we talked about justice, where let's get it right, let's take our time, let's take 5 years, 6 years, turns out to be 10. In this, there's deadlines that were put on us. But are you comfortable at the end of the day that all of the proper steps were taken?
Absolutely. We have done so much outreach into the community, and I'm satisfied, and I think it's very telling, with the polling station, what people have an interest in, and this is the final process of the CDMP. So we'll, invite everyone to come out to the meeting on November 20th, and if they haven't, it's still posted online, so they have an opportunity to see what the draft law is all about.
Mm-hmm. And of course, that's www.KahnawakeMakingDecisions.com. Also, you can just go to Kahnawake.com, and that'll bring you to the website, the Mohawk Council of Kahnawake website, and you can access it from there. Lloyd, just some last thoughts maybe on this as we head toward the hopefully the home stretch.
Yeah, well, maybe just a point in terms of marijuana or cannabis itself. Maybe there's some misconceptions out there. People are like, well, it's a legal product. It's still a controlled substance, even though it been decriminalized to a certain amount of possession. I believe it's 30 grams. And the use is not a criminal offense. To have large quantities, to sell, to manufacture without the proper permits is still illegal, whether you're in Kahnawake or anywhere else. And I think that's important for people to know that it's still a highly regulated product.
Yeah, and many people are not comfortable, of course. Ron, just some final thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, for the I'll deal with the November 20th first, I guess. We're looking at the a two-way conversation, if you would, with people who want to know why the law was crafted in a certain way. It's not really to change things, unless there's something earth-shattering that we forgot. But it's really to have that discussion as to why it was crafted this way. Once that's done, then hopefully we'll go to the signing of the confirmation of the will of the people, and then an enactment through council. And just to reiterate what Lloyd had commented on at the end, is that we have to understand that it's still, even though it's legalized, okay, there are restrictions, changes in legislation to impaired driving and drug, the fines and the penalties have become more stiffer. So even though it's become a legalized product, you still have to be responsible in its use. And the Kahnawake Peacekeepers will enforce the laws that are applicable right here, and which means part of the criminal code. So people have to be aware of that.
All right, Rhonda, any final thoughts as we close this up?
Just for community to remember that we are having our final meeting on November 20th, and everyone is encouraged to participate.
All right, so there you have it. November 20th, it's a Tuesday, and it'll be at the Peacekeepers Station Community Room. It's a nice big room. It's well lit and has a certain warmth to it if you've never participated in a meeting over there. Meeting starts at 6, and as we always do at the community decision process meetings, it's scheduled from 6 to 8:30, and hopefully at that point we'll have some news and can move forward, and hopefully we'll see lots of you there. So thank you very much for taking part. Thanks to Ron, Rhonda, and Lloyd, and for you for watching. Thank you very much. Kahnawake.